All right, thank you, Nadia, and welcome everybody. I am Randy Mays, the Executive Director of ILTA.
And I'm Skip Lemire. I'm the CIO at Jackson Kelly, and we are USDA Prime Introverts. And by the way, there are 273 seats in here. We were happy they weren't all filled, but they happen to be filming us today, so the pressure's on.
All right, well, let me talk just a little bit about our agenda for today. Let me just say that Skip and I are both outspoken advocates for introverts, so you're in good company here with us. Now, we are going to talk a lot today about how to succeed as an introvert in an extrovert's world, in a world that glorifies extroversion. And along that process, Skip and I will share some of our personal stories, and I'm hopeful we can give you some tips and techniques that will really help you and give you some practical takeaways to bolster your toolkit to look a little bit more like an extrovert out there in the world. You'll also hear some advice that focuses on others. What if you are an extrovert and you have an introvert boss? That's important to know how to deal with that individual. And certainly you're going to have some introverts on your team. It's important that you're able to identify the skills that they bring to the team and optimize those for your workplace. And certainly we want to have a lot of fun today. Our primary mission is to make sure that you leave the room feeling especially proud to be an introvert. I think there's a lot to be proud of.
All right, so we're going to try an experiment, although I heard with the power generation coming on, we're not sure how this is going to affect us, but we're going to do something fun and quiet. We're going to take a brief poll to see where the audience stands on the spectrum of introvert and extrovert scales. And maybe you've taken the Myers Brigg before, and maybe that will help, and you might be able to just save time and pick one of the buckets of answers in the polling so we can see the distribution of where everybody stands. 0 is a perfect scoring extrovert, and a 13 plus is a perfect scoring introvert. Now, in the assessment that we have on the link for the poll, so if you go to the app and you go to the poll, you'll have a link at the top. It takes you to a short survey. It should take no more than about 3 minutes to fill out. We'll wait a couple minutes for everybody to fill it out. When we start to see more heads up, we'll continue on. But the idea is here to answer quickly. You can't answer each question more than once, as in it has 3 options. You can only choose 1 or 2. If you choose 3, it's going to error out, but you got to choose at least 1. And just move on quickly. Don't think about it too much. You know, introverts have a superpower of overthinking things at times. Don't do that. Just think quickly of answering 1 and then moving on. Once you have submitted, it'll take you to a profile score for the full Myers Brigg profile, like an ISTJ. What we want is the I number that it gives you. Go back to the poll and then select the number range that fits the number that you got as a score for your I score, your introvert score. So we'll let everybody take a few minutes. If you have problems, you might just have to guess. We apologize for the disruption we've had a little bit ago. We're just happy there's no fire.
Well, probably want to move on.
Yeah, we can move on. I think we've got a good distribution here of the number of people that were able to select their answer.
And sorry about all the technical difficulties that we've been having here, but really I suspect that many people, if not most people who came to this session, you probably are introverts and you're looking for some survival skills. But this graph will show you generally how the audience lies in the extroversion at the top of the graph, extreme introversion at the bottom of the graph scale. Now, if you land somewhere in the middle range, you're actually labeled an ambivert. And that means that you have both introvert and extrovert qualities that you can call upon depending on the situation. So you're very blessed in that regard. I think we are predominantly introverts in this audience, and Skip and I are going to keep this session highly non-interactive, just the way that you like it. All right. Skip, I may need you to navigate back.
Sure.
We also are not able to use a laptop on which we prepared the presentation, so.
All right, so now that you know your score, or unfortunately some of you weren't able to get the survey results, but hopefully it will come back online soon. You can try it again maybe later. But wherever you land on that scale, we want to discuss what that means and what it doesn't mean. There's often confusion in vocabulary about introversion. Too often, I think it's synonymous with shyness, and that's a totally different trait or challenge for some folks. Introversion and social phobia or shyness are two different things. Introversion is not a fear of public speaking. It is not a fear of social situations. It's not a fear of interaction. That's shyness. Many introverts are also shy, but each trait exists independently. It is also true to note that extroverts can also be shy. And ask an extrovert if before they get up on a big stage with a bunch of people if they're nervous. I think most people are probably nervous before they get up in front of a stage having to do magic tricks or wonder if their mic is going to work or not. If you have extreme social phobia or shyness, we suggest spending some quality time adjusting that skill, and unless you want to live in a world where you don't make contact with anybody, which according to Peter Diamandis on Monday, that might be a little impossible. Regardless of where you fall on the intro-extro scale, improving your social skills should be an important part of your professional development, which is why we added it to today's sessions for the ILTA conference. It was offered by the conference committee, thinking that it would be a great professional development topic. And it's important to note that being comfortable to talk to strangers is not the same thing as being good at talking to strangers, meaning you can be good at speaking and talking to strangers, but it can remain to some degree uncomfortable. And to an introvert, it's sometimes downright draining. Our focus today, though, is on introversion and what is an introvert. Randy, you want to tell them?
All right. Well, really, introversion or extroversion relates to the processes by which we derive our energy. It's how we recharge our batteries. And an introvert is going to naturally gravitate toward and really find the greatest energy from internal stimuli. We're in our heads a lot, and much lower energy from external stimuli. So as you answered some of those questions on that little mini Myers Brigg test, you probably saw some questions that spoke to your desire for solitude. Solitude when you recharge your batteries, solitude when you are creative, solitude when you are at your best in the workplace. So this introversion characteristic is really just the first component of the Myers Brigg profile. And you've probably seen your 4-character Myers Brigg profile before. I think it's really important to note that it's just one of the major categories. And it's certainly not an all-inclusive descriptor for a human being. And where you test on the intro-extro spectrum does not define you. Now, by the way, if you tested with one of these, you are in the wrong session, my friend. And you might be happy to know that this is my Myers Brigg profile. And I suspect that many of you are Introverts as well.
All right, so it's very important to note that we are very complex beings. And this is just a personality trait test that you can take, but it is not exactly who you are. We are very complex. And it's very important to note that even though if you may have scored perfectly as an introvert or an extrovert, you're really both. It's just a matter of how you gain your energy. You know, one is more draining than the other. You're going to have a more dominant side unless you're exactly in the middle as ambivert. And then maybe you get energy from both, that would be really cool. But the reason that I and E traits garner so much attention now, and it's made its way into this session today, is that our world seems to glorify extroversion, and at times treating introverts as if we have a handicap. We're disordered, damaged, or incapable of having social skills. We've been trained from an early age to believe that it's something that needs to be fixed, that something is wrong with us. We are introverts. We are defined as a way of someone who can't adopt and fit into the world, into this very popularized extroversion model that we're forced to try to adopt, which is draining for us as introverts. Unfortunately, it's taken a direction in that way in our society, especially in the United States. Not all countries have taken this particular direction, but it's in there, and you can probably sense it in our schools, our sports teams, social clubs, our employers, and maybe even our extroverted parents, all of which are factually false on these premises of fostering erroneous beliefs about introversion.
So let's take a look at some of these erroneous and frankly very harmful beliefs about introverts. As Skip mentioned, we're often labeled as very sad and lonely, socially inept, and again, it can be viewed as a handicap. In our school system, teachers often reward the very outspoken extroverts, and that is signaling that introversion is not a desirable trait in our children. And introverts are not nearly as participatory or outspoken. And unfortunately, again, this reward system is seen in our workplace and even in our conferences. So when we're asked to break into teams in our sessions, the facilitators are often, they're looking for those highly engaged tables. And they especially note that outspoken contributor, the one that seems to be coming up with all the good ideas and really directing the dialogue at the table. And I think that's awful.
Beyond our desire to debunk these notions, we also want to stress our belief that understanding your profile and working towards finding peace with it matters. It's not just enough that we realize that we are introverts, but we must embrace it and understand how we can gain our strengths from it. When you make choices that are aligned with your temperament, you excel. But when you conversely spend too much time battling against your normal demeanor, you often deplete your resources and require recharging. Again, we're all here to tell you that even if you're a perfect scoring I or E, that it doesn't matter, because you can have positive feelings about speaking. You can have positive feelings about social interaction, and many of us do. And as an extrovert, you can have a positive feeling about being alone. A mentor once told me that the biggest explanation between an introvert and an extrovert is just how we recharge our batteries. We're drained by one or the other action, while the opposite gives us the energy to go back and do other actions. So as an extrovert, or an introvert, we can all speak, we can all socialize, and we can all be quiet in our own minds.
And as I mentioned earlier, Skip and I, again, are outspoken advocates for introverts. In fact, we think introverts absolutely rock. And here are just a few famous introverts. You'll certainly recognize Einstein and Lincoln. You'll recognize Rosa Parks and Eleanor Roosevelt. Bill Gates, Gandhi, and Warren Buffett are other well-known introverts. But there are millions and millions of introverts from all sorts of disciplines. In fact, a third to a half of the population are introverts. And of course, in the ILTA world, you have your two adorable co-presenters today. And I thought it was very interesting. I was privileged to be one of the judges for the 2014 Leadership Award. And our three final nominees all exhibit the finest traits of introversion. And those are John Alber, Pete Miller, and Jillian Power. I found it very interesting that, and John, I'm very glad you're with us today. Thank you for that. But if you attended the awards ceremony last night, you probably saw on John's leadership video, he actually had his staff talk about leadership qualities. It was not John who made the video. Likewise, when his firm was up for Innovative Law Firm of the Year, he used animation in that video clip. And I think it's an excellent example of how creative introverts can be to avoid being in the limelight. Now, Skip and I weren't so creative today because we are, in fact, being video recorded. But I think we introverts are definitely in some very distinguished company.
Let's look at some of the characteristics of introversion. See if you can identify with any of these, all of which relate to quiet recharging of your batteries. I like getting my energy from dealing with ideas, pictures, memories, and interactions or reactions that are inside my head, in my inner world. I often prefer doing things alone or with one or two people I feel really comfortable with. I like taking time to reflect so that I have a clear idea of what needs to be done and how I decide to act. Ideas are almost solid things for me. Sometimes I like the idea of something better than the real thing. For example, I like the idea of speaking at conference, but doing it is rather draining. It's as if I only have some words in the day sometimes. Like I'll have a really long day where I have to talk a lot in meetings, and then I'll go home to my perfectly scoring extroverted spouse in the audience here, and I'll be really quiet, and she'll say, "Did you use all your words today?"
All right. Well, one of the sources that Skip and I will cite several times today is Susan Cain, and she literally wrote the book on introversion called Quiet. And she's also the leader of the movement called the Quiet Revolution. And Susan characterizes introverts like this paragraph on the slide. I will now violate all rules of PowerPoint presentations and read from the slide because I think this is really compelling. Given the choice, you'll devote your social energy to the people you care about most, preferring a glass of wine with a close friend to a party full of strangers. You think before you speak and relish solitude. You feel energized when focusing deeply on a subject or activity that really interests you. You have an active inner life and are at your best when you tap into its riches. And this honestly perfectly describes me. And if you are an introvert, I bet this describes you as well.
Yes, before we go into these of her excerpts from her manifesto, I do want to note that one of the most powerful statements in her YouTube TED Talk video, you can watch fully, which we have some excerpts in here, but she says the same words that people kind of label introverts, that we're antisocial and all. And one of the most powerful things she says in there is, there's another word for us, introverts, thinkers. And here are just a view of her observations in the Introvert Manifesto. A couple of them I'll pick out. Solitude is a catalyst for innovation. Introverts, because we are thinkers, we think deeply about things when we have the time, and we can come up with some great innovations when we have the time to really think about them on our own. And Gandhi's quote in here is really great. In a gentle way, you, the introvert, can shake the world. And note in here, you see a period, not an exclamation point, because the exclamatory statement of this is to be said quietly to have gravity instead of shouting it. Okay, so we spent some time talking about the traits that are common to introverts and how we've gotten a bad rap. Now let's talk about how fabulous we are and why every boardroom, every executive suite, every governing body, and every law firm ought to have introverts at the helm or in them. And because we take leadership roles on tasks, projects, and work teams as introverts, we'll focus first on leadership qualities. And let's remember that quiet leadership is not an oxymoron, one of Susan Cain's other manifesto items.
All right, well, here are some of the leadership skills that introverts possess. We listen very well, and we listen often. We like to obtain information from multiple sources before we arrive at a decision or pass judgment or come to an opinion around something. We often anticipate change, and we're also very good at reacting to change. And this trait called pivoting is actually very prized in the tech world. We do have great focus. We can give our full attention to a project even when chaos is unfolding all around us. So I think really regardless of whether you are in a leadership position, whether you aspire to a leadership position, whether you have zero interest in a leadership position, simply knowing that these are your strengths and always playing to them will provide you great satisfaction in the workspace. And conversely, I think if you're forced to pretend to act counter to these strengths, you'll likely feel very unsatisfied. You'll feel drained, and you could feel a whole lot worse. So I would encourage you to analyze your own strengths against this very brief list here and see where you have opportunities to exercise or exhibit these strengths in your work environment. And I want to stop just and share a very personal story with you, if I could. Many, many years ago, when I was first elected to ILTA's board of directors, and this was long before it was called ILTA, by the way, I can remember attending some of those early meetings and feeling completely intimidated. I felt inferior to everyone else in the room. I observed that these individuals were very outspoken, some very forceful, as a matter of fact, and were very quick with coming up with ideas and would often even overtalk each other. And these were just all behaviors, if you will, that did not exist for me. And again, it made me feel inferior. And I was delighted one day when a couple of my colleagues on the board came to me and expressed how much they appreciated that when I spoke, they knew that I had listened to everything, taken in everything, and come to a very thoughtful opinion around the issue. And that completely changed my worldview at that point. I thought, wow, I'm a wonderful contributor to this group of individuals.
Yes, listening is a superpower, I think, of introverts. Being in a new job for an introvert can clearly be an advantage, because many times when you're hired, it's because they have a need that needs to be filled. Something's broken, you need to fix it. And as an introvert, you ask the questions and then you just listen. And listening is how you figure out what to fix, and then you can determine how to fix it. Introverts can also express themselves well in writing. If that's you can write blogs, articles, even for ILTA. They're always looking for great article writers. And maybe that's a good way to get better involved in the ILTA community rather than, say, speaking. You'll see great people skills up here. And contrary to maybe what society might have labeled introverts, we are very good people, skilled people, people.
Purple people leaders.
Peel. We are good at recognizing others, and we remain diplomatic. We are comfortable letting our employees that work for us run with their own ideas. And we can deeply empathize with people. And if you were in the Swartworth session earlier this week and saw General Huffman speak, the biggest takeaway was, take care of your people. And I think he said it pretty much like that. And if you heard that as an introvert, you know how to do that, because you can empathize with them and you try to help them through their struggles, through their job tasks or their personal issues. So caring for others and helping others is certainly a strength that we have as introverts. Also, introverts have a superpower of superior focus, being able to phase out the entire world to focus hard and think deep about a particular task. So in this particular photo that my wife snapped of me, I'm sitting here wonderfully energizing, reading a favorite article of mine in a magazine, empowering me to think deep about a particular topic, while the chaos ensued of an Easter egg hunt all around me. Kids screaming, I didn't hear them at all. Now the funny thing is, an extrovert might look at this and say, I was being antisocial, I was not participating. But I was just doing what was absolutely fun and energizing, and I felt just as much a part of the Easter egg hunt being there, reading that article. So here we're going to talk about, or we're going to watch a clip from Susan Cain. It's a very, very brief clip of her TED Talk, which is, like I said, fully available on YouTube. In this clip, she speaks on the issues of how very important introvert behaviors are to the world around us.
All the times that I got the message that somehow my quiet and introverted style of being was not necessarily the right way to go, and that I should be trying to pass as more of an extrovert. And I always sensed deep down that this was wrong, and that introverts were pretty excellent just as they were. But for years, I denied this intuition. And so I became a Wall Street lawyer, of all things, instead of the writer that I had always longed to be, partly because I needed to prove to myself that I could be bold and assertive too. And I was always going off to crowded bars when I really would have preferred to just have a nice dinner with friends. And I made these self-negating choices so reflexively that I wasn't even aware that I was making them. Now, this is what many introverts do, and it's our loss for sure, but it is also our colleagues' loss and our community's loss. And at the risk of sounding grandiose, it is the world's loss, because when it comes to creativity and to leadership, we need introverts doing what they do best.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about where you are on the intro-extro spectrum, and we've talked about some of the skills that introverts possess, and we've asked you to examine your own skill set against that. But let's turn now to really how to take care of yourself, both personally and professionally. We call this personal hygiene. And the reason for this is we want all of you to be more comfortable in your introvert skin. We would be hopeful that you can project more of an ambivert persona, just so that our extrovert world can accept you very openly. I would ask that you, first of all, pay attention to your own threshold for external stimuli. When is the noise simply too much for you? And you should develop some strategies, either to leave the noisy environment or to dampen the noise or to block out the noise, as Skip did with the Easter egg hunt that was going on around him. Give yourself plenty of alone time. Find the quiet spaces amid the noise. And I know even at a conference of this magnitude, that can be a real challenge. But I also think we're extraordinarily good at finding the little quiet spaces somewhere. It's important to unclutter your schedule. Your calendar needs some quiet time as well. Now, I would encourage you not to compare yourself to somebody, but if you insist on comparing yourself to somebody, choose an introvert. Never compare yourself to an extrovert. And continue to identify your strengths and play to them. I think that is the key message today. Don't fight or deny your own nature. You heard Susan Cain talk about that a minute ago. And find or create opportunities in your workspace that really allow you to exhibit your wonderful introvert skills and to excel in your workplace. And I would also encourage you to develop or improve some social networking skills. Skip and I are going to give you some strategies around that here in just a minute, but those strategies you should use and fake it until you make it. And please imagine some successful outcomes as you go into social interactions.
And even though we know where we gain and lose our energy, and wherever you stand on that intro-extro scale, building those good social and professional network skills is advantageous, especially in today's competitive job market. Good social skills can be a differentiator. So if you use your introversion and shyness as an excuse to sit on the sidelines, you really need to rethink your strategy. Even myself at times will think, I really don't want to go to that event because I'll have to meet and it'll be exhausting. But there are skills and tips that we have here today that maybe will get you there. And then once you're through it, you have something to look forward to, like recharging time. So here are just some ways to get some more practice so you can get better, because it's like a muscle. It's like anything else. You've got to practice it. It's a skill. Attend meetings and conferences. Get out there. Talk to people. It's easier than you think once you get in there. It's harder maybe for introverts to get there is the problem. So commit to going. Say that there's a quarterly or monthly ILTA event. Try to always go. Even though there are only a handful of people, and maybe the same people, it's still good to exercise those muscles. Assign yourself a mission. A mission might be introduce yourself to 5 people. Now, if you're a deep introvert, you might say, oh my gosh, 5 people, that sounds like a lot. Well, just start with 2. Start somewhere. Once you get into the zone, you might find that it's a lot easier than you think. Volunteer to welcome people at a meeting. All you have to do is shake a hand and say welcome, and then they come on in. That could be done at your church or at an ILTA event or just about anywhere that you could volunteer. Prepare some questions on a topic. Say that things like, hey, what was the best session of the day? And take breaks as needed. It's okay to take breaks. Have a standard statement to excuse yourself. You might use an excuse like, excuse me for a minute, and they don't know why. They don't need to know why. And maybe you're going to the restroom just to be alone for a minute. So you got to plan those alone times also after the event. So you have something to look forward to and remember that you have time to recover. And it's okay to be by yourself to recover. It's not a bad thing. It's not an antisocial thing. It's a recharging thing. It's good for you so you can think about what you learned and talk about. And when you get there, scope out a rally place to recover, like I mentioned before. A couple of the ideas that we wrote down is to excuse yourself is, excuse me, I have to go to the restroom. Or maybe you have to get a drink refill. Or maybe it's to make a phone call. Or to check on and see if your friend is showing up. Another thing you can do is seek out other introverts. You can sometimes see them sitting alone in the corner, not talking to anybody, deep into their mobile device. Walk over and just commiserate with them a little bit. And chat about, hey, what's going on? And see what they respond with. And just start up a conversation. And the last thing is plan your escape. When you know your batteries are depleted or about to get depleted, execute your escape plan. I always have some level of escape plan. Like I always want to make sure to get to bed by X hours. So that's partly a timed escape plan. Hey, and if I want to stay longer, I do. And it's okay to leave party earlier than other people. It really is. I know sometimes you want to stay until the end to make sure that you're getting that face time. It's okay to leave early. People leave early all the time. Just think about a good statement to use, and we'll go over some of those a little bit later.
All right, let's continue with some ideas here on building and improving your skill set. And this really speaks to expanding your professional network. So take advantage of the social networking tools. We've already identified that you're probably a very good writer, so optimize that skill that you have and play to that strength again. We would encourage you to post on ILTA's e-groups, be seen as a very knowledgeable advisor out there. Use the plethora of social networking tools that are available to tweet, to use the app here at this event, to blog, to publish, to just generally let your views be known through writing. I would also encourage you to identify people that you think are very skilled in social interaction and observe them and learn from them. Now, it can be just that simple. You're going to observe and learn, or perhaps you establish a more formal mentor-mentee relationship around that. And practice your conversational strategies and techniques, and always attempt to raise the bar on yourself. Now, Skip and I will actually give you some conversation tips here in just a minute. And I'm going to repeat what I said earlier, fake it until you make it. But in that faking it, observe your own limitations around superficiality or phoniness, because in faking it, you don't want to appear fake, so be careful with that. And then, of course, rinse and repeat. Practice always makes perfect. Again, I'm going to pause and give you a personal story around this. In addition to my introversion, I suffered from debilitating shyness as a young person and well into my young adult years. And I was blessed to have an aunt in the family who was, at the time, I really called her a social butterfly. So I was able to observe her. I was able to see her in social situations, to see how she greeted people who came into her home, to see how she would walk up and engage someone in conversation, because all of this honestly was completely alien to me. I did not know how to do that. And it turns out that really she was an extreme introvert herself, and these were just skills that she had learned or taught herself. So it's very interesting to see the cycle in that. But frankly, she was one of my early mentors, if you will, and she did not even know that. So just as learning to interact socially is important, I think it's also really important to bolster your skills in the professional arena to lead to career advancement. Because strong interpersonal skills, even the ability to speak publicly, are usually prized by your employers. Often it may be an employment differentiator. And certainly these are activities that are looked at as you move through career advancement opportunities. So let's look at some ways that you can participate in group activities. I would encourage you, first of all, to get in the right frame of mind as you are about to enter a meeting at work or you're about to go into some group activity. Get in a mindset that says, this is an opportunity for me to contribute some ideas. This is not going to be another drama fest. And please value your own voice. Make sure it's heard. Now, because you're an introvert, you're not going to add to the noise in the room, but you certainly want to make your good idea be known. Don't personalize any comments that the extroverts make. They're often very clumsy attempts at communicating. Sometimes our extroverts lack filters, and those extroverts will say the darndest things, so be careful with that. And again, use your superior listening skills. Sometimes you need to act as an interpreter for someone who may not have good listening skills. They're not paying attention. They don't know what is being said. So help them with that. And finally, wow the crowd with your well thought out response, and you'll become known for always saying the perfect thing.
Pre-flight your ideas with your team and mentors ahead of the meeting. It's a very helpful tip for me. I like to get more comfortable with what the content or agenda is going to be before I get to the meeting, so I know what to prepare for. And in that, I think positively about the outcomes or discussions. Ask your team leader or the person that's going to control the meeting how they want you to participate, whether that be preparing for a particular task or discussion point. And then volunteer for tasks that are ideally suited for your strengths for introverts, such as thorough planning or brainstorming or writing the plan. All right, so this next slide is the Speak Up slide. It's the speaking skill improvement tips. And a couple of areas where you can enhance your speaking skills. The personal story I have here is that I decided to jolt myself into getting some speaking skills because I wasn't very good at it at all. I had a fear of it, and I applied for an adjunct professor position. That's 4 hours of lecture a week, so I figured I had to perform or I was fired. But it certainly helped me exercise those muscles and build those muscles quickly. That's one way to do it. I don't always recommend that route for everybody, but certainly it's nice to have somebody that can push you in that right direction to help enhance those speaking skills and get those muscles working. Toastmasters is another great opportunity for people to learn in a non-threatening environment. And you can try some of these opportunities. Volunteer to facilitate some meetings. Be a panelist for a speaker event. Teach or volunteer to teach. Now, your local community could probably really use some English as a second language instructors. And speaking opportunities at your firm or within your department sometimes are available. Say if you want to make a pitch or a project idea discussion. And seek out seasoned speakers and professionals to learn from them. But practice, practice, practice. Exercise those speaking muscles.
But Skip just covered speaking up. Again, the local meetings are wonderfully welcoming environments for you to start small with that, so please consider it. Use your great writing skills. Write for an industry publication. Wink, wink. I know an organization who happens to have some wonderful publications, so please contact me if you're interested. You might consider joining a committee or task force. ILTA has lots of things that might be relevant to your area of expertise, so keep an eye on the volunteer opportunities. I think Skip mentioned earlier, host a local meeting. It's a great opportunity for you to practice some of your social skills, get to know your comrades a little bit better. And then also consider service in some of the higher leadership roles, perhaps serving on a board of directors. Be very careful with that. Make sure you understand the role. Perhaps it is a thought leadership role, which would be ideally suited to you. If it's a different kind of role, if it's managerial and lots of talking and meeting management is required, perhaps that is not the best for you. But I actually think thoughtful leadership is always in demand. And since we're on the topic of improving your social interactions, let's talk very quickly about attending a meeting and getting some good conversational skills. Again, I'm going to move more quickly than I would like to around this, but let me just say one little personal comment again. When I told people that Skip and I would be doing a session on introversion, dozens of people commented to me, "I can't believe you're an introvert." And that's because you all maybe see me at most once a year. And I'm hosting a meeting, folks. I'm hosting a meeting, you know, for 4 or 5, 6, 7 days, depending on how long you're here. And I hope I'm a good hostess. I hope I exhibit good social skills with you. But if you saw me every day, especially if you saw me every day in the evening, you would probably have a very different view of how I am. You would see me more as an introvert. Before you go to a meeting, gather some intelligence. Know what the meeting is about, know what topics will be discussed, know your host or hostess, know who the attendees are, know what the commonalities are. This intelligence will provide you topics for conversation when you're at the meeting. When you are engaged in conversation about yourself, and by the way, be prepared to talk about yourself, be careful not to give really short answers that puts the burden of conversation on the other person. So if I'm engaged in conversation with Skip, I've just met Skip. Skip says, "Randy, where are you from? Where's home?" Rather than saying, "I'm from Austin," I might say, "You know, Skip, I've lived in Austin well over 40 years, long before it was known as the music capital of the world." That gives him some ideas about what to say next, or maybe where to take the conversation at a different branch. So that's just a really good conversational tip for you. And certainly that intelligence that you've gathered before the meeting, that's going to help drive your conversation at the meeting. Be prepared to bolster the conversation if the other person is giving you short answers. Hey, did you hear what's happening at XYZ Corporation? Other person says no. Well, you're kind of stuck there. So know your follow-up line. "Oh my gosh, they just laid off 5,000 people at headquarters." Don't take the no as the end of the conversation and walk away. Continue to try to engage the person in dialogue. And have a few default questions that you can fall back to. And again, be prepared to follow up if the other person gives you a short answer.
Here are some tips for engaging in conversation. In the dialogue, how do you break in? Well, you want to have maybe an opening line. You do want to wait for a pause. You don't want to be rude and over talk, but you might say something like, "I heard the same thing from my team." And a couple other things. I won't read the whole thing, but the rest of all these slides are available, of course, on the mobile app or on the website. But some important ones to remember to break in. You can use it's all about the other person. Ask them a question and let them talk about themselves. It's a great way to get into a conversation. And strive to be interested rather than interesting, meaning still making it about the other person, but be engaged and interested. And listening, there's that listening thing again, one of our superpowers, is one of the greatest assets we can have in a conversation.
Well, Skip and I have told you some things on what you should do in making conversation, but there are a few rocky cliffs that you need to be aware of. It's really best if you don't do any of the following. So try not to compete with the person that you're making conversation with. You shouldn't debate with the person. It's not a good idea to joke about anything other than yourself. Fortunately, I'm blessed with a very strong self-deprecating humor that has helped me quite a bit. You shouldn't complain. Nobody likes a whiner. You should not dominate the conversation, but I'm guessing if you're just learning the art of conversation, it's not likely that you would be dominating anyway. You should not disagree overtly. Now, it is certainly okay to have a different opinion from the other person, but if you express that different opinion, do so very, very politely. You don't want this to escalate into debating at some point. It's important not to judge the other person in the conversation, and you certainly don't want to try to impress them. It really is more about the other person than you. And don't you love it when somebody asks you a question and then begins to talk over your answer? So be sure you don't do that to somebody else. Really, for me, all of this stuff just means talk unto others as you would have them talk unto you.
Right. Authenticity really matters when you're speaking to other people. All right, so here on this slide, we have some conversation tips in 4 different categories, and I have 2 examples for each one. So try these in a conversation sometime. For open-ended questions, you could try, what did you do for the project team? Or you could say, what was the best session of the week? Offer an add-in or of what you've heard from the person you're conversing with. I'm interested in that too. I volunteer at ILTA. Or you could say, that doesn't sound great, or that sounds great, and I attended one too and thought of the same one and would like to use that information as well. Another thing you could do is paraphrase what you heard. It sounds like your firm has a close relationship with the City Council. Or, this session deliverables are applicable at our firm too. I think we can leverage this in our firm. And finally, ask more information from the person you're conversing with. It gives them an opportunity to tell a little bit about the background of whatever they're talking about. You may ask, can you tell me more about your firm's records retention policy? Try to be a little specific in those questions. And what other issues or projects are you working on? This slide, when you're leaving the conversation, remember we talked about that before, and you want to have some closing lines in your pocket. And some of these are easier than others, but it's always good to have 2 or 3 memorized so you can exit gracefully. Some of them might be, I've enjoyed talking to you. I look forward to seeing you in Chicago. Please tell Dave I said hello. And let me know when you'll be in Austin. It was very nice to meet you. Keep in touch. I'd love to know how that project turns out. And best of luck on that project. Or you can simply say, take care, it's been nice meeting you. Most people, consciously or subconsciously, will see these and hear these as cues so that when you say them, they recognize that, hey, the conversation is wrapping up. Excuse yourself quietly and quickly. And the less you're in the mix of the conversation, the easier it is to excuse yourself quietly. But obviously, if you're in the middle of a conversation, just standing up and walking off would be rude. So use those simple phrases like excuse me or the ones we mentioned before.
All right, well, let's change subjects a little bit here. Skip and I would like to talk with you about working with other introverts. And we'll start with if your boss is an introvert. So this is working for the quiet boss. And even really for a fellow introvert, this can be rather difficult. So here are a few tips to keep in mind. I would suggest, first of all, be sure to give them lots of information. Don't wait for them to ask you for it, and don't assume that they'll give you high praise when you do give them the information. I think giving is its own reward in this situation. They're going to be very thankful that you're keeping them in the loop, and you should always anticipate their need for information. Work on your inner dialogue again. Change your expectations. If they told you something once, they may be expecting you to pay attention and do what they said. It's not likely that the iBoss is going to repeat him or herself very often. So don't expect them to be doing that. Be a leader. The hallmark of a leader is someone who can set his own direction and take the initiative. And in this situation, because the iBoss is not giving you a lot of direction, it really is your opportunity to show some leadership, to show some initiative. Look at the iBoss's silence as a good sign. Find your own sense of accomplishment inside yourself and view that silence really as a form of affirmation or a form of praise. Check your noise level. If you know you talk a lot, you should probably take it down a notch or two. Allow there to be silence between you and the iBoss occasionally, and you may find that silence to be a gift. We know you're good at listening, so do it. Listen carefully, and you can count on your introvert leader to say very well thought out things to you, and that iBoss will count on you to be listening. So if you're not a good listener, you might miss some of the points that your iBoss is making, and that iBoss is not likely to repeat it. So practice your listening skills, and you'd be surprised at how few people have great listening skills. So even a little bit of attention here will go a long way. Learn to listen to your iBoss. Also look for other ways to communicate. We know that the introvert likes to get things in writing, so perhaps this is your opportunity to communicate more in writing and less through speaking to the person.
Let's talk about optimizing introverts in meetings and the specific things that you can do to help bring out the best of introverts. Give them thinking assignments ahead of time. Whenever reasonably possible, ensure they have time to think, imagine, and brainstorm alone before the meeting. Provide an agenda in advance. Introverts like to know what will be discussed ahead of time. The longer the notice ahead of time, the more the introvert will have time to have that deep thinking time so that they can have solid contributions and feel comfortable about what they have to offer. During meetings, close the door. Reduce distraction. It provides a better focused environment. This is also a really good one for extroverts too. That, having more time to focus on what the task is at hand with the team. In the meetings, ensure there's ample silence, as Randy said, giving the time for the introvert to speak up. Calling on an introvert must be done very carefully to prevent putting them on the spot. They don't generally like that. A good tip for that one might be go around the table in a circle to hear from each member attending the meeting. And it's really great when the introvert might be in the middle or the end, and that way they have time to think about their responses ahead of time. However, some introverts are bursting to share their thoughts because they have that valuable information they had time to think deeply about. Let them, as soon as they usually want to speak up, just let them speak up, because they usually have these huge epiphanies that will be very beneficial for the meeting. These folks are your deep thinkers. Give them time to do that deep thinking. You'll likely be optimizing their leveraging of their abilities.
And we all know that the best teams have a combination of introverts and extroverts. You really need the special talents of each group to contribute to success. Now, the extroverts are likely to self-identify when, where, and how they're going to contribute to a team. But if you manage or you are a coworker with an introvert, you might need to assist them a little bit. As we've identified the strong suits of introverts, the savvy manager or coworker will keep those special talents in mind and facilitate the optimization of those skills and traits. So remember that your introverts will respond well to information provided ahead of time. Skip commented on that, because it does give them time to think and prepare. And they can engage in very active inner dialogue without being put on the spot. If you've already identified a task that will be ideally suited to your introvert, communicate with him/her ahead of time and formulate a plan on how you'll explain the special assignment to the team. Keep in mind that your introvert is a great listener, and actively seek out their ear in vetting ideas before and after a meeting or while working on a project. They can often provide an inspirational spark when a project has become stagnant. Keep in mind also that your introvert staffer or coworker might prefer written information over spoken instructions. and be sure to connect with him or her to ensure that they've gotten the information they need in the format they need it. Now, the introvert is never likely to thrive in a large group activity, so be sure to create some opportunities for individual success or small groups where they can actually select their coworkers. Optimize complementary skill sets on your team. And finally, as you think about celebrating the success of a project or marking a project milestone, remember that your introvert might relish downtime over a big noisy party or some forced face time with coworkers. So allow your introvert to help create a celebration strategy that works well for all the parties and provides options for differing styles.
Right. So now that we've told you about introverts and we've given you some tips on how to be in a conversation or to work with other introverts, we're going to give a little bit of homework. And this can be at an ILTA conference or anywhere. We'd like you to put some of these tips into action that you've heard today. We challenge you at the next social event that you attend, set a goal of meeting 3 to 5 new people and use some of these conversation tips from the presentation. The information from the presentation is available via the mobile app or the conference website, including additional materials on the last slide going deeper into the understanding of how awesome introverts are. Remember, it is a critical skill to socialize professionally, and it's just one step further in understanding and getting your game face on and practicing that and exercising those social muscles that we mentioned earlier in the session. If you're an extrovert, identify and reach out to one or more introverts or shy attendees at the event that you're at. Help them become a part of the conversation. It is an excellent leadership opportunity to make sure that you know how to bring out the best of introverts and extroverts working on your teams.
That's great advice, Skip, and it really is important to practice all those skills that we've talked about today. I also want to leave the listeners with what I call a bonus assignment. And really, this is something that you can and probably should do over the remainder of your life. Skip and I have talked a lot today about that very strong inner dialogue that most introverts have. And I would encourage you to leverage that. Many times today, both Skip and I have referenced imagine a successful outcome, envision success in what you are about to do. And I would challenge you to create a list of topics, and I'm going to give you some examples here, and create the stories in your head. Create the outcomes for these topics. So my examples that I'm going to offer for further pondering are perhaps the worst day as an introvert. How did that go for you? What could you have done differently? Conversely, your greatest success story as an introvert, and I bet you have a few great success stories. How about if only I could have done that differently? So replay that tape in your head and fix anything that went wrong there. Or my introversion saved the day. Again, create some successful outcomes there. So I would challenge you to continue to think about that. I think what I'd like to do, Skip, is go ahead and close out with the Susan Cain video. In the slideshow, though, I would encourage you, we have some information on if your boss is an introvert, whether you are or not. There are some tips on working with the iBoss, so be sure you take a look at that. And then just working with your teammates who are introverts to recognize and understand how best to optimize their skills. But Susan Cain has such a powerful message around this. I would really like to close out with what are the final 3 minutes of her TED Talk, and I might need Skip's help in getting back to that here.
Right. And we included in these slides, especially the last slide, a bunch of links that you can use to research more about introversion.
Now, all of a sudden, my job is very different. And my job is to be out here talking about it, talking about introversion. And that's a lot harder for me because as honored as I am to be here with all of you right now, this is not my natural milieu. So I prepared for moments like these as best I could. I spent the last year practicing public speaking every chance I could get, and I called this my year of speaking dangerously. And that actually helped a lot. But I'll tell you, what helps even more is my sense, my belief, my hope that when it comes to our attitudes, to introversion and to quiet and to solitude, we truly are poised on the brink of dramatic change. I mean, we are. And so I am going to leave you now with 3 calls for action for those who share this vision. Number 1, stop the madness for constant group work. Just stop it. Thank you. And I want to be clear about what I'm saying, because I deeply believe our offices should be encouraging casual, chatty, cafe-style types of interactions, you know, the kind where people come together and serendipitously have an exchange of ideas. That is great. That's great for introverts, and it's great for extroverts. But we need much more privacy, much more freedom, much more autonomy at work. School, same thing. We need to be teaching kids to work together, for sure. But we also need to be teaching them how to work on their own. This is especially important for extroverted children, too. They need to work on their own because that is where deep thought comes from, in part. Okay, number 2, go to the wilderness. Be like Buddha. Have your own revelations. I'm not saying that we all have to now go off and build our own cabins in the woods and never talk to each other again. But I am saying that we could all stand to unplug and get inside our own heads a little more often. Number 3, take a good look at what's inside your own suitcase and why you put it there. So extroverts, maybe your suitcases are also full of books, or maybe they're full of champagne glasses or skydiving equipment. Whatever it is, I hope you take these things out every chance you get and grace us with your energy and your joy. But introverts, you being you, you probably have the impulse to guard very carefully what's inside your own suitcase. And that's okay. But occasionally, just occasionally, I hope you will open up your suitcases for other people to see, because the world needs you and it needs the things you carry. So I wish you the best of all possible journeys and the courage to speak softly.